Carolyn Doobie here. Oh, what's the play for today? Well, today I'm exploring using a gel press plate with sublimation. And what I'm going to create are these magnets here, and they're very shiny and they look perfectly smooth. And that's because they are perfectly smooth. The process of sublimation using the Artesprix paints is going to make it so this stuff is permanently fused in there. This isn't painted on. If you scratch it, nothing's coming up. It is wild what the sublimation stuff can do. And I'm going to share with you how I did that using the gel press plate. I'm going to start by putting a stencil onto the gel plate. And I'm really pushing that stencil on there to make sure I've got great contact so it's going to hold it in place. Because the paints that I'm using here, the Artesprix paints, they are a little bit fluid. So making sure that your stencil is down completely on the plate will help keep the paint from running underneath, especially if you've got a lot of details like what I have on this stencil. The stencil that I'm using is called Cutouts inspired by Matisse, and it's one I designed for over at Stencil Girl Products. As I'm brayering on the three colors here, I want you to notice how the paint begins to bead up in the stenciled areas. I have found that the Artesprix paints do bead up on the gel plate, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because it really adds an extra dimension look texture to what's created. And you'll understand by the time we get to the end when we do the heat process on this. If you've seen many of my videos, you know that I am drawn to super bright and vibrant colors, and that's really not what these three look like right now. But this is not the finished look that they're going to have. This is sublimation paint so that when the heat is applied, it will change. It is going to brighten up. It is not going to look like these very muted colors right now. It will become very vibrant. The paper that I'm going to take the print with is nothing special. For sublimation with the Artesprix process, you don't need any kind of special paper. I happen to be using the same old cardstock I use all the time when I'm printing. You can use copy paper. Again, it's not about a special paper. It's really about the paint. That's what's going to make the sublimation work here. Artesprix also has sublimation markers. And so with these, you can draw on paper and then sublimate that design. I have been in full experiment mode, just getting to know the sublimation process and these supplies. And so I thought I'd play around with putting some of the markers on top of some of the paint. And one of the things that I did learn, I realized, is that the paint is very water soluble. So that means as I go over it with the marker, if I go over it with a bunch of pressure or over the same area several times, it will actually smear the paint. So as I'm putting the marker on there, I'm putting a very, very light touch. One of the things I'm really curious about is what will happen when I put the marker on top of the paint. Will the colors kind of blend together and I get a new one? Like by putting pink on top of the yellow, is it going to get more of an orange look? Or will the marker dominate and it stay mostly pink? Or, well, what's going to happen? So that's why I'm trying a couple of different colors in different places on different colors of the paint, just to get to know how these supplies work. When you're creating your design to sublimate, one thing to keep in mind is that you need to do the reverse of it. So if you're doing something like words, you'll need to write them backwards to sublimate them. Since this is just a design, I'm not worried about it being the right way or backwards or anything like that. This is just a pattern. It can go any direction. But just a heads up, if you are doing words, that kind of thing, you will want to do the reverse of it on your paper so that when you use the heat and sublimate it, it will come out facing the right direction. And I cannot stress this enough that the color that you're seeing right now is not what the color will look like when the sublimation is finished. It really does have a very muted look to it right now, but it will be much brighter in the end. Now I'm going to make a really loose, messy kind of pull. And I'm going to use all three colors, and you might notice there's a bit of sort of a red tint to my plate. That is from the red Artesprix paint. Now, is that a problem? Well, that's a personal preference thing, because it doesn't impact how the plate prints. So from that aspect of how the plate functions, it doesn't have any impact. But visually, you do have that little bit of pink, that discoloration there, so if that's a concern to you, just a heads up. Now for this print, I am using more of my finger to spread the paint around than the brayer, just because it ends up creating areas of more paint using my finger. It's not quite as thin. So that means it won't bead up as much. So that's why I use my finger more than the brayer. But now that I've got this very loose, kind of messy print going on here, I'm going to take the pull on the back of the print that I just did. I used a very small amount of pressure to take that pull, so I just got some of the paint. If you want to get more of the paint on there, just use a little more pressure and more paint will come up. Now the reason why I put that color on the back is I'm hoping some of that back color will actually show up in that final piece of sublimation. And because I'm new to sublimating, I am experimenting, trying things, and just seeing what'll happen. And this ghost print that I'm taking here, even though I'm not going to use it in the project in this video, I'm still going to save it because there are some great possibilities in there, and it'll go in my stash of papers made with the sublimation paint that I can use anytime I'm doing a sublimation project. I'm going to be using sublimation magnet blanks here, but this is not the only thing you can use. There are a whole lot of choices out there in the world that you can do sublimation with. This particular one happened to have a layer or a plastic film on top of it, and so that's what I'm removing with my finger. If you've got some kind of protective cover on top of it, you are going to want to remove it before you do the sublimation. As I'm deciding where to put the blanks, what part of the pattern I want to catch on there, I'm going to hold it up a little bit so I can see through the light where the color is on the backside, because wherever I choose to put this, I want to capture some of that color on the backside because I want to see if it's going to come through, as well as thinking about where it's positioned on the front. Now the tape that I'm using to hold these in place, this is heat tape. And when you're doing this, you do need to use a special tape because this thing is going to get hit with 400 degrees. So whatever you're putting under that has got to be able to handle being 400 degrees. I could just do one of these or I could do a bunch. And I'm actually going to do 6 of them here on this page at the same time. And as I'm figuring out where I want to position them, I want to show you something that happened with the tape. Notice that one that's a little sort of diagonal there? It's got tape underneath it from the other one. Well, if I have tape underneath it, it's actually going to block the sublimation. The heat tape will actually block it. So that's why I wanted to move that heat tape so it was on top of that blank as opposed to under it. Once you've got everything positioned and taped down where you want it to be, then you need to bring in some protective paper. This is a reusable paper that is designed to protect the surface that you're working on, as well as your heat source from any color transferring to it. I am working on a heat pad there. That'll protect my countertop from the heat because I'm going to set a heat press on top of there at 400 degrees for 60 seconds. You may not have one of these, so you can substitute with a household iron. When you're doing that, you need to make sure that there's no water in it, there's no steam, that the iron is set at its hottest setting, and wherever you're trying to transfer an image, there can't be any of the holes in the iron. It's got to just be on that solid flat part of the iron. And when you put the iron down and you're holding it down, giving it some pressure, you want to make sure that the iron stays still or else your image can look a little blurry. Well, now that the 60 seconds are up here, I can remove the heat, and then this is the hardest part for me. This is waiting. May not surprise you to know that metal, when you put it at 400 degrees, gets really hot. So you want to give this plenty of time to cool before you try and peek under there. And the reason for that is you just don't want to get burned. So these have now had enough time to cool that when I touch them with my hands, it's not going to hurt me. I'm not going to get burnt. So I can start peeling them off the paper and then lifting off that heat tape. Now that heat has been added to that paint, it has become much brighter. Even though it looked pretty dull on the paper, those are some wonderful bright colors that are on the finished pieces. And what about the paint that was on the back side, that print that I did on the back? Well, it did bleed through. You can see it really noticeably with the little bits of blue on a couple of these, but there's also some yellow and little flecks of red. It's just hard to get it to pick up on the camera. So it just gives a nice, soft sort of background vibe to it when you've got the paint on the back side of the paper. And what about the markers? What about those? Well, let's take a look at the 2 on the left side. On the top, you've got sort of that green shape. That is where I put the yellow on top of the blue paint, which gave it that green vibe. And then down underneath it, the one below it, there's a very strong red there. That was where I used the pink marker on top of the yellow. Right now, these are simply thin pieces of metal that I've sublimated on. To turn them into magnets, I simply peel off the magnet backing and stick it on the back. These pieces did come with the blanks, so they're designed to just line up one on top of the other really, really easily. So now I've got a complete set of magnets that I can give as a gift, or I can put up on my own fridge. Now you've got an idea of how the sublimation process works the gel press plate. If you want to know more about sublimation, check out Artesprix's website at artesprix.com. They've got lots of information on there. Well, thanks so much for joining me for this video. Now, if you'd like to see more things you can do with a gel press plate, be sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as Gel Press has a new video up. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.